test rig, Liberator EXP001. And I brought Andy Greenberg out there. It was in the morning. It was like 7 a.m. in the morning, like some windy out of Lockhart, Texas, and bam, we pulled that thing, fired the first time. There was a kind of, we saw like the glow out the barrel and everything. And Andy Greenberg was just like, you know, you didn't believe it. And from that moment on, it was like a race against the clock. So we didn't do any more remote testing. We had maybe remote tested the Liberator like 3 times before that, maybe twice. And the thing I knew needed to happen, all I had was this idea, like there was this image that needed to be kind of broadcast. And not just it firing in a technical sense, like on a stand, but like someone holding it and shooting it. And it had to be me. So I had the BBC set their cameras up, I had Andy set his camera up, and we had our defense distributed camera kind of all on the side on this little like, one of these like ammo stands that you can have at these gun ranges. And I did it, you know, and John was like, hey, good luck, bud, you got brass balls, because like I wouldn't fucking shoot that yet. But you know, it had to happen, like it was the moment, you know, the BBC had flown out from London, I mean like, it's do or die. And you know, maybe die, but and that's it. I pull in the moments online, and I encourage you to go see it. It's like I think it betrays a certain kind of humanity to it. When I've tried often not to be a very human person in these YouTube portrayals, but there's a bit of humanity to it, and I pull it, and it does fire. We had learned some things in the weeks after that. That in fact, firing pins are quite fussy. If you don't have one that's very concentric, like its concentricity isn't kind of just right, it'll strike low or high on the primer, and you won't get a fire. And it was kind of a miracle that, in all of that, like that first critical week of testing with media and everything, they had not missed fire, because it kind of became, you know, its reputation that it was really fussy and wouldn't always fire for you, maybe only half the time. We worked a lot of that out, but like just a few weeks ago, I had National Geographic down, and for like an hour, we couldn't get it to fire. We finally did it, but I mean, you know, I thought, some kind of blessed moment, like a divine, you know, it shot the first time I needed to shoot when all the cameras were there. I don't know how I am on time, but if there's like more technical things I can say, I wish to say them. So if you're thinking about printing a Liberator, a critical thing that's kind of left out of the conversation is the acetone vapor treatment, which I think was novel for that application in gunworks. People in 3D printing that were using ABS at the time had kind of demonstrated, especially in the hobby space, that if you use acetone vapor, you can smooth your prints down, and you can take layer edges and kind of like adhere them together, and you get a much more attractive print. This is really useful, especially because Stratasys and other companies hold patents for like heated build chambers, which otherwise would really smooth out a print or kind of make it look a little bit better than what you have available to you at your desktop. So it ended up that with acetone treatment of these barrels, just the Liberator barrel, you could go from 1 round through to these 8 or 9 that we were seeing. I mean, that was a very critical part of what we did. And if you're going to build one, use the acetone vapor. It's in the spec sheet, it's on the Pirate Bay, it's in the archive and everything, but you treat it, you boil the acetone or you have it vaporized, you treat it for like 20-30 seconds, and then you wash it either in vinegar or water, and that's critical, because you can't let it kind of stay beneath the layers of the plastic. It'll kind of make the barrel too brittle, and the barrel will explode if you shoot the gun, which has happened to me. But I've lived to tell about it. So I don't know, what's more interesting, or like the legality or the technical stuff about it? I guess another thing worth saying, I kind of said this last night, was there was a bit of like an agitprop moment on the part of the government, where they used the Liberator as a football. When the ATF had published these videos of their own firearms technology branch testing the Liberator pistol, they include modified versions of our design, not originals. And of course, this is not a surprise to those in the gun-making world. The firearms technology branch kind of famously is secretive and will modify your designs and then tell you, oh, by the way, your gun is a machine gun. You're like, what? I didn't design it to do that. Like, oh, sorry, you know, you can't go to market with your gun. And what they did for ours, and you can see this, thankfully they've preserved the evidence on video, but they printed one Liberator in a PLA plastic, because MakerBot and some of these other commercial printers, they have offerings available in PLA plastic. Now, we print Liberators in ABS plastic. This is not a small distinction. In fact, Liberator springs in PLA don't even function. They're too brittle. You can't even get a firing Liberator. Even if you wanted to die and blow the gun up, you couldn't do it. So what the ATF did was print a PLA body and then modify. They took the sidewalls off and put in modified springs. I don't know how they did it. They seem to have like really stretched and widened the springs. And I'm not sure if they're still in PLA. They might actually be like an epoxy spring that just kind of matches the visual, milieu or whatever. And that modified gun they shoot, and then they have it kind of, fragmented into 1,000 pieces. And, it was this very visceral moment that they used to kind of help sell the re-up of the Undetectable Firearms Act in December of last year. Not that we are surprised that our government would throw propaganda at us, but it was an extremely propagandistic moment. And it, of course, depended, like the Waco trials, 15 years before, it depended upon public misapprehension or, unfamiliarity with the underlying technologies and specifications. So most people don't have 3D printers, most people don't care, most people don't make guns, and so look, it's dangerous, it's a lethal weapon, it explodes, there's no quality control. It's all in service of a progressive idea of gun manufacture. We need responsible manufacturers that license their products and perform them through government-mandated testing specifications, blah, blah. I think, though, regardless, we've done critical damage to a couple different narratives. One of them a progressive narrative about what the future of manufacturing was and is. The whole gun conversation after Sandy Hook depended upon an idea of registration. The familiar shit from the 90s, registrations and these certain channels and constrained channels of production and commerce and background checks and this kind of linking with the public health issue. I mean, we exploded with this networked idea of manufacturing, digital manufacturing, networked devices, a tumultuous fall in the cost of the means of production. All will be makers. I think it did really irreparable harm, and will continue to do that. Yes, I'm currently embroiled in this conflict, for lack of a better word, with the State Department. I would want nothing more than to continue to publish, to aggregate these files for these guns, these physical gun files for you, and to publish them. Now, some people kind of behind the scenes, pseudonymously, are continuing to do that. And they are great people for doing that. But there's so much more we can do. The Liberator was the very first prototype of a certain kind of gun that we had done. And yes, it's an impractical device. But to give you a kind of preview of things to come, we were experimenting with centering in nylon 6 and nylon 12. Not that these are dramatically better in material properties than the Liberator, but there's so much more interesting. It can do just different things. And of course, there have been announcements for desktop printers like the Mark I, of which Defense Distributors acquired a developer kit, at least pre-order, that prints in carbon fiber, which of course has similar material properties to aluminum. At least in its tensile strength and other kinds of impact strength. So we're on the cusp of having immediately, not just these technical proofs of the future that we imagine, but literally the kind of immediate instantiation of the future we imagine. And what's so much more beautiful to me is that a fully carbon fiber Liberator, or some variant of that, remains undetectable by metal detector. Bonus. So, I guess a point on that, this was supposed to be a technical talk, but here we are. So a point on that, there was this kind of grand conflation with detectability versus observability. And the conversation I wanted Defense Distributed to have, and I think by and large successfully did have, was one about power and observability and the kind of grand bureaucratic regulatory imagination that all things will be known and seen and kind of, the prior approval, grand diktat. So in California, there's this idea now, don't you know? Some people can create guns without first the approval of the Department of Justice. These ghost guns can kind of come out, as it were, out of nowhere. We don't know who makes them. Ghost guns, look at this. Ghost gun stories. No, I've had so much fun with the kind of phantasmic nature of this. I do believe there's actually a kind of, there's more to write there. Maybe, I have a book. If you read the book, maybe it'll be in the book. So the idea there was, well, of course, you'll just write into justice, and justice, because, justice is all about being responsible about who gets guns and where they get them from. Eric Holder, is really on the ball about who gets them. So, they'll send you a serial number. And then you have the kind of, the grant of privilege from the state to go ahead and manufacture your firearm. And Steve Israel and then Chuck Schumer were the New York kind of delegation successfully ginned the issue up into, these things are defeating modern imaging. Therefore, all guns must have a critical amount of metal in them, like the Undetectable Firearms Act suggested, but to go one step further, which was beautiful. I saw Think Progress and everyone kind of pile in on this one. There were certain critical pieces of a gun which must always be made of metal. Now this is extremely dangerous, and I think immediately apprehendable by the libertarian imagination. This is a dire effort to constrain the development of a particular technology. Not just to constrain it, but to stratify it, right? To keep it stratified. All guns and their critical components must be metal. Well, why is that? You know. And the critical remarks can go one or two removes further. But that was an intention, a direct intention expressed to preserve the current state of firearms technology where it was, which is the progressive agenda, the paradigm of government, beyond generalized security, this dissuasion of the event, if you will, right? This prevention of the kind of overwhelming flow of events and technology. And I guess, I don't know where I am on time, but I want to open up to questions. I will.
You were going through the FFL approval process so you could actually sell some of these things in interstate commerce, is that correct?
Okay, so FFL is a federal firearms license. He's asking, did I get an FFL so we could participate in commerce? No, actually. It's just that a nonprofit company can't also be an FFL holder. You have to act like you're a business. And so I actually had to create a subsidiary and register that subsidiary as an FFL. And of course they, on the ATF on the phone, he was like, oh, we know what you're doing, and a nonprofit can't have it. And I was like, no. Check the application. I didn't apply as defense distributor, you motherfuckers. And so, I'm serious. It was a tense conversation. Of course, at every step, these little micro kind of aggressive encounters. It's like, we know what you're doing. Stop. And no, And so there was this. I think Vice made a bigger deal of it. Aaron, the producer of that Vice documentary, if you saw it on Defense Distributed, was like, why are you getting FFL? And I was like, oh, liberator trials, SOTs, if we have this if we can make Title II firearms, the air colder can't come arrest us, we can prototype almost any kind of abstract gun technology. And she was like, yeah, but you can sell them too, right? Like, yeah, we can sell them. And have we today? No, we haven't. I don't know why. I think mostly it's because 3D printing, let's be honest, I'm not the biggest 3D printing evangelist, but 3D printing is not really a mass production technology. I'm sure there's a price point I could set where it might be worth my time, but it's actually a bit higher than I'm sure anyone in this room would be willing to pay for some of these articles. And then again, there was another effort in trying to protect ourselves from this kind of commercial talk, especially now that we're involved in this thing with the State Department. Traditional First Amendment claims, which are our primary claims against this aggression from the State Department, we have a right to publish this information directly into the public domain without first seeking the prior approval of the government. This seems like standard First Amendment talk, right? To make that claim the most effectively, we can't also be a commercial operation. Many people have tried to do that in the past. Commercial arms exporters say, well, I have a First Amendment right to share my manual with the French, or to share my manual with South Africa. No, not so much. The Supreme Court says, well, your speech doesn't rise to the level of protected speech. Your speech is commercial speech. So that was a kind of defense mechanism that I was at least prescient enough to see then, and I've tried to maintain now. Yeah. Oh, a microphone.
So, I'm assuming most people in the room have not yet printed one of your guns. Let's say we want to get started. What are the steps? What are the equipment? Maybe a ballpark of prices.
I'm sorry, I should have said more of these things. I kind of lapsed into just talking about the kind of more abstract things. The Liberator's printed on a Stratasys Dimension SST. It's a machine from 2005. It was like I think the first generation of its name. These printers have gone on to become the U-Print family of Stratasys printers. There's a heated build chamber. I believe it's 8 by 8 by 13 is the build volume, and it's as big as like a refrigerator. I mean, it's like a big, printer. It's expensive. We bought it in the secondary market. It was a little bit broken. We fixed some things on it. We bought it on eBay because maybe, as you know, I couldn't really buy things from Stratasys because they have a habit of not selling me things and taking things away from me. Also in servicing that printer, it was a shit show because we couldn't give any indication that we were defense distributed. So when we would have the Stratasys people come out and look at it, I did it through a surrogate, and I hid it in a different part of this warehouse we were in an auto shop, and we kind of pretended that it was a car company. I mean, anything we could do to kind of all these little, oh god, man. It's like bringing it back. I hadn't even thought of it. So I would recommend something with a heated build chamber, but I've seen people do Liberators on solid oodle printers. I've seen them do on their own custom rigs, like Bill did, who introduced me. Anything that can print ABS plastic. Don't kind of go out and get a new generation MakerBot, because it only prints in PLA, is my understanding. And I wouldn't recommend it. I guess the other critical things I should say is if you're really interested in printing a Liberator, I think, again, I wouldn't recommend you doing kind of serious testing with it. But then again, if you're intrepid, you know. But if you just kind of want to print one for yourself and do it to spec like Defense Distributed had done, find the archive on the Pirate Bay or somewhere else online, and it's kind of an exhaustive step-by-step instruction. And we'll tell you the materials we use and the things that we can only recommend that you do because that's all we did. And I've only ever tested liberators, printed liberators from old 3D systems, SLA epoxy resins, and ABS plastic. So in many ways, other people in the world have kind of probably tested far and beyond what we have with liberators. I had to kind of stop using all of our money on materials because my legal bills were the very biggest and continue to be the kind of biggest part of Defense Distributed. Yeah.
You mentioned the thing with the State Department. Could you give us any clue what's going on with your legal stuff? And
Yes.
problems and
Yes.
any comments or
Well,
stories?
for the very first time last weekend, I was at this conference in Arizona. It was the very first time I talked about it. I kind of, for many months, I didn't want to say anything about it or what we had done or the legal team we had got together. I wanted to kind of preserve it as like at least for its explosive potentiality. Like people would tell each other about it when the time came when we needed to tell people. So if you don't mind, I'm kind of going to keep some of that like under wraps. But to date, the State Department's actually sat on it. Like.
Sat on what?
Okay, I'll go back. So the State Department issues me a letter, and for the very first time in American history, the history of export control law, whatever, they put in writing an express policy, which is, before you put this kind of technical data onto the internet, this would require our permission. You didn't seek our permission. Please fill out, this extremely large amount of paperwork called the commodity jurisdiction request about how you decided that you shouldn't ask our permission. You have to have a sense of humor about me too, but thankfully I was able to lawyer up very quickly. I had made a number of connections in the months of our kind of heightened popularity and our most productive work. And that team, by and large, remains the same team. And to date, I've been able to kind of shoulder the legal bills. But the State Department requests of us all of this information, which of course in this ironic, like Kafkaesque sense, is the only way that it can even make a determination that we've kind of broken some law.